Jimmy was delighted to finally have a hit single with Hey Joe. But by early 1967, the Jimi Hendrix Experience was still playing the club circuits all over the UK. Even the ones like the Bromley Club in the Bromley Court Hotel, Bromley Hill, Bromley, Kent, where they played 2 dates on the 4th of January 1967 and the 8th of February 1967, where Brian Jones and Bill Wyman were there to see him play, but also a young musician called David Jones, who would later in the year would release his first album and change his name to David Bowie. One of the most memorable performances that the Jimi Hendrix Experience played was on the 27th of January 1967, where they performed at Chislehurst Caves, Chislehurst, Kent. Friends of mine who saw the Jimi Hendrix Experience perform that night all say that Jimmy was electrifying, especially when he started to play the guitar behind his head and making the girls in the audience scream. But what really made the evening even more special, they said, was the sound that Jimmy was able to get from the guitar. Because hearing the sound hit the rocks of the caves and back again was absolutely amazing. It's a shame in a way that neither Chas Chandler or Chris Stamp, for that matter, never actually recorded this show for a future live album, but it's easy for me to say that now. Looking back at it now, there were still people who hadn't even heard of Jimi Hendrix. And in those days, they did just release Hey Joe and had 1 television appearance, so you can't really blame them. One other thing that turned out to be very important that evening at the Caves was Jimmy invited electrical engineer Roger Mayer, who would end up working with Jimmy throughout his tragically short career. Roger had developed this device for Jimmy's guitar sound that Jimmy would end up using both in the studio and for live performances. Here's Roger to explain.
I told Jimmy about one of the new devices I'd been developing, which was called the Octavia, and he might be interested in having listened to listen to it. And he said, yeah, he was really excited about hearing it. And he invited me down to a gig in about a couple of weeks' time, it was, at Chislehurst Caves in Kent. And backstage, before he went on stage, I brought a prototype along of this device, and Jimmy played with it backstage. And that was the beginning of our friendship. And he suggested that I come down in it wasn't about 5 days' time to another gig at the Ricky Tick in Hounslow, and then I went to that gig, and he said, "Oh, bring along the Octavia." He said, "We're going to do some recording afterwards. We're going back to Olympic Studios after the gig in Hounslow." And we went to the gig. The gig was pretty wild. Jimmy ended up putting his Stratocaster neck through a very low ceiling in the club, And after that, we went back to Olympic Studios, and that was the night that Jimmy recorded the overdub solo for Purple Haze using the Octavia. And he also did another tune on the same night, another solo, and that was for Fire, both using this new device,
Allegedly, Jimi Hendrix wrote Purple Haze in a dressing room in a small club in the East End of London called the Uppercut Club, Forest Gate Centre, Wood Grange Road, London. In between sets, when the Jimi Hendrix performed there on Boxing Day, the 26th of December 1966, apparently Chas Chandler heard Jimmy playing around with this riff, saying to Jimmy, "That's your next hit." Sadly, the Uppercut Club was demolished in 1991. Newham Council have put up their own plaque which reads, "On the land behind stood Forest Gate Public Hall, once known as the Uppercut Club. Many famous musicians performed here, and on Boxing Day, December 1966, whilst appearing at the Uppercut Club, Jimi Hendrix wrote his legendary Purple Haze. And I have to say, it's thanks to Neandra Etienne, who is the lady pictured in the middle of this photograph, who managed to get English Heritage to finally honour Jimmy with a proper blue plaque. And the unveiling ceremony took place on Friday the 28th of May 2021, which makes it even more special for me, really, because the location isn't far from where I used to watch my football club, which is West Ham United, when they used to play at the bowling ground, Upton Park, East London. According to Jimi Hendrix, when he had written Purple Haze originally, it was supposed to be a lot longer, with a lot more lyrics. Here's Jimi Hendrix to explain what he had in mind for the original version of Purple Haze.
You know the song that we had named Purple Haze? Yeah. That was about, it had about 1,000 words, and it's about 14 minutes long. But that was, you should have heard it, man. I had it written out. It was about going through all these, this land, you know, this mythical, because that's what I like to do, is write a lot of mythical scenes. You know, like the history of the wars on Neptune and all this mess, you know. And the reason why the rings are there, you know, you have all these, see like how they got the Greek gods and all that mythology. Well, you can have your own mythology scene, or write, you know, fiction, complete fiction, you know. And when it's time to cut it, they could just screw it up so bad.
It was Chas Chandler who persuaded Jimmy to cut the song down to 2 minutes and 46 seconds. Otherwise, the DJs wouldn't play the song if it was over 3 minutes on the radio.
Ooh, this got me so mad, because that isn't even Purple Haze, you know. You know, we must be Elvis Presleys and rock and rolls and trogs. We must be that.
Jimmy recorded the main song with the Experience for Purple Haze at the Delaney Lee Studios on the 11th of January 1967. But both Chas and Jimmy found that recording at the Delaney Lee Studios had its problems. Apparently, it was Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones who suggested to both Chas and Jimmy that they'd be better off recording at the Olympic Studios in London. In fact, let's listen to the man himself. Here's Chas Chandler to explain why he decided to change studios.
We started off, the first studio we went in with Jimmy was Delaney Lee, which was a small studio in Holborn with a bank above it, and had one of the first computerized systems, and every time we started playing in there, we had trouble with the computers in the bank, so I had to find somewhere else where I could make a noise. The great asset of Olympic was it seemed as if you could play louder than other studios I'd been in. It had a big studio floor. It was an old cinema. The control room had a sort of, it was like a small desk, but it was like a wraparound desk. So you weren't stretched. You didn't have arms 6 foot long to reach buttons. It was all around you.
In fact, Jimmy recorded the overdub solo, as John Mayer, the engineer, quite rightly said, between the 3rd and 8th of February 1967 at Olympic Studios in London. Jimmy also recorded, with Mitch and Noel, the backing vocals for Purple Haze. Also, you've got to hear the isolated vocal track that Jimmy does on Purple Haze, when he does the sound effects like... And then you hear him and Mitch and Noel going,
Purple Haze, Purple Haze.
Purple Haze with 51st anniversary. On the B-side was the Jimi Hendrix Experience first official single, released on Track Records in the UK on the 17th of March 1967. But the first pressings of the single were released on a white track label, which was issued with a push-out centre and a solid centre simultaneously from different record plants in the UK. According to Chris Stamp, he didn't like the label's colour because it resembled like a promo record or a demonstration record, so he withdrew the single and repressed it with a black track label. Anyway, Purple Haze, with 51st anniversary on the B-side, reached number 3 in the UK charts.